This is James Taylor, and you're listening to The Creative Life. The Creative Life podcast is a show created for you, the creative. If you're looking for inspiration, motivation, and advice while at home, at work, or on your daily commute, then this show is for you. Each episode brings you a successful creative, whether that's a musician, writer, artist, designer, performer, educator, or creative entrepreneur. They share their journey, their successes, their failures, their creative process, their insights, and much, much more. In this episode, I speak with innovation author and speaker Warren Berger. We talk about how to ask more beautiful questions, the creative process when it comes to writing and speaking, and also the idea of frame storming. Enjoy this episode. Hey, it's James Taylor, and I'm delighted today to have Warren Berger. Warren is an innovation expert, speaker, and author of 5 books, the most recent of which is A More Beautiful Question. A long-time contributor to the New York Times, Wired Magazine, and Fast Company, Warren describes himself as a questionologist. He believes asking questions can spark innovation and lead to change. An expert on design thinking and innovation, he has interviewed top entrepreneurs, creative artists, designers, and innovators to find out how they ask game-changing questions, solve problems, and create new possibilities. It's my great pleasure to have Warren on the show today. Welcome, Warren.
Thank you, James. It's really great to be here.
So share with our listeners, what's going on in your world just now?
What's going on is I am, I finished my last book about a year and a half ago, and I am doing a lot of speeches and talks based around the book. But at the same time, I am preparing to do a follow-up book. So I'm now in the very early stages of the next questioning-oriented book. Which means I'm in the concept stages of figuring it all out, how it's all going to fit together, what are the pieces of it going to be. So I think I'm in that kind of big outlining and planning stage for that, while at the same time writing speeches. That's kind of my day job right now.
And you've been writing for the past 20 years, and I mentioned you're author of 5 books. Does the process get any easier as time goes on? Did that process become shorter, in which you're able to think about research, think about the ideas that you want to write about, and then actually write them?
I go back and forth on that. Part of me thinks that it's getting a little easier because I've got my process down a little bit. I kind of have a sense of how to outline a book, how to plan it, and how to put the pieces together. And I'm probably more experienced at figuring out how to do the research and then kind of putting all the pieces together. But on the other hand, I definitely feel that, now that I'm in my 50s, I feel like I used to be able to really, at the last minute, jam on my writing for maybe 10-hour, 12-hour stretches. And I find I can't really do that anymore. So I have to be careful now and leave myself a little more time for writing so that I don't assume that I can do these incredible marathons of writing, because I'm not sure I have the energy to do that kind of extreme writing anymore.
And how did you first go about kind of developing and learning your craft as a writer and developing it?
In my case, let's see, I was sort of playing around with writing when I was in high school. I was very imaginative when I was younger. I used to sort of create worlds in my head, and I used to have action figures, and I'd be acting out scenarios. And so I was always creating from the time I was very young. Started to do a little creative writing when I was in high school and getting into college. And then somewhere around that stage, I decided I wanted to be very practical. And so I thought, well, if I like to write, how do I know if I can make any money at it? And how does one make money at it? And then journalism, popped into my head. I had an older sister who was a journalist as well. And so I immediately moved into that direction and was trained as a journalist and did that for quite a number of years before I went back to doing my own writing on a freelance basis.
So a lot of journalist friends I know, they kind of, when they start becoming a journalist and developing their career doing that, making the move back into doing their own gig, their own kind of work and developing their own books and projects, it can sometimes be a little bit challenged because you kind of get into that comfort thing of, you have a mortgage, you've family to support. You've got all those other things, and making that jump to writing and publishing in a book or a novel or something can be quite a big jump. So how did you kind of go about? Were you kind of moonlighting or getting just up a little bit earlier to writing your own projects or working at weekends? How were you doing it?
Well, it was all sort of a natural progression, because what I did was I went from working as a journalist in a job for newspapers and magazines to then deciding, hey, I'm going to see if I can do this on my own, but I'm still going to do it in a very practical way. So I'll set up myself as a freelance journalist, but I will, rather than trying to write a big book or a novel or something kind of risky like that, I will make my living, doing articles, magazine articles, which I was pretty confident I could get assignments. And I already had some contacts and things. So that was, for a number of my early years, that was what my whole freelance writing life consisted of, was like making an income based on putting together enough freelance magazine assignments over the course of a year. And I was always able to do that, and it was great. And then somewhere along the line, I started to want to branch out from that and do something bigger than an article. I felt like I wanted to get into a project where I wouldn't just work on it for a month and I'd be done with it, something that I could stay with over the long haul. And that's when I started to work on books while still doing articles on the side. And that's kind of led me to where I am today, writing books primarily, but on the side, I may still occasionally do an article, as well as doing, speeches and things like that. So the book has kind of become the primary writing job for me now, but I still have, my hand in other types of writing as well. I'm a big believer that you can do a lot of different kinds of writing or creativity. If you're an artist, you can do different kinds of art. If you're a writer, you can do different kinds of writing. People get pigeonholed too easily as, I only write about, the fashion world, and that's all I do. I write articles about fashion or something like that. And I'm much happier when have a number of different areas maybe that I'm writing about, and different kinds of writing, and I'm using different muscles. That just works for me.
I would imagine as well there's quite a lot of cross-fertilization that's able to kind of go on if you're writing about one thing and then you're also thinking, or you're kind of mulling another potential project, those kind of cross-fertilization of ideas happen.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the more you're looking out into different areas, the more you can connect ideas. And it's what's really interesting. Sometimes you connect ideas from one field with another field that can lead to a whole different insight. You might be writing, if you're a business writer, you might be writing about one industry, and then you start writing about another industry or another field like the Hollywood film industry, and you notice something that they do in that industry, and you say, gee, what if the people back in the pharmaceutical industry did something like that? Wouldn't that be interesting? And it can lead you to these interesting connections and epiphanies. So I find the more you are looking outside one field or one area, the better that is for your creativity.
And you used a question there when you were saying that, what if I did this? What if I did that? Something you write about in the book, latest book, A More Beautiful Question, is it's kind of what happens to children when we all know those 3-year-olds, those 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds, we're all bursting with questions. Why is it doing this? What is that? What's that for? But then something seems to happen when they kind of go to school. I believe in the States it's called the 4th grade slump, I think it is, or what?
Yeah.
So what's happening there? Why do we stop asking questions?
It's a beautiful question. And, I'm not sure we have a definitive single answer to it, but I think there are a number of answers that you can sort of look at next to each other. Children are asking hundreds of questions a day when they're 4 or 5 years old. Interestingly, some studies have shown that girls are asking even more than boys. 4-year-old girls are the ultimate question machines. But anyway, boys are also asking a lot. They're all asking a lot, 4 or 5, 6. It starts to decline as they're in school. And, the experts I've talked to seem to point to a number of things. One is, well, part of it is human nature. As we start to know more, we don't feel we need to ask as much. So even when you're a child, you're starting to think you understand how things work. And certainly by the time you're a teenager, you think you've got it all figured out. And so the more you kind of think you know what's going on, the less maybe you're asking questions. But in addition to that, there are social pressures involved. A lot of young kids are very comfortable when they're at home around their parents asking lots of questions. Then they get into a classroom situation, they're around people they don't know. Suddenly they start to get a little nervous about asking questions. And then if they start to pick up the signal, which they may from teachers, that the questions are a distraction, that, they're kind of questions kind of slow things down. Gee, we need to move ahead with the lesson. And if you're asking a lot of questions, that's kind of slowing things down. Kids pick up on that signal if they're getting that signal from teachers. So they can easily start to think, oh, questions are an annoyance. If I ask questions, I'm being annoying, therefore I shouldn't do it. And then the last thing is that, of course, questions, and this is true for adults as well, questions we worry that when we ask a question, we're showing weakness because we're admitting to those around us that there's something we don't know. And so a lot of us are reluctant to, as we get older, particularly we're reluctant to show that weakness. And so we may hold back on questioning. So I think you put all those factors together, and what you have is a kind of a conspiracy against questioning.
So as adults, how do we go about kind of reclaiming that questioning muscle in our minds? What do we have to do in order to say, okay, I recognize how important the quality of my life is the quality of the questions I'm asking. How do we go about kind of reclaiming that?
Well, the first thing is that recognition. I think that one of the problems is that we haven't traditionally placed value on questioning. So if we don't value something, we're not going to do it. If we think that all anyone cares about is whether we have the answers, and if we think the only thing that matters in our lives is whether we have answers and whether we've figured it all out, then we're not going to spend a lot of time on questions because we're going to be convinced deep down that it's not really that important to ask questions. So I think the first thing we have to do is recognize the value of it. And that it's something worth doing and it's something worth spending time on. And then I think it's a matter of, how do you get better at questioning? A lot of that is about slowing down. A lot of it is about paying more attention to the world around you, paying closer attention, listening more closely. What that does is it tends to cause you to get off of the automatic pilot that we're all on. You'll start to maybe notice things that you aren't noticing before. And as you begin to notice and look at things with a fresh eye, the way a child does, you're likely to start questioning the way a child does. As you notice interesting patterns, interesting things, you're going to say, why? Why does this pattern exist? Or, what if this were done a little bit differently? So I think just the slowing down and the stepping back and looking at the world with a fresh eye is a very important first step to becoming a better questioner. And beyond that, there are certain skills you can use to improve the formulation of your questions. That gets a little more technical, but it's about learning the difference between open-ended questions and closed questions. Closed questions being basically yes or no questions, or questions that have a very factual answer that you can look up on Google. And, closed questions are very valuable in a certain sense, but sometimes when you want to really expand your thinking, you need to use open questions, the big why and what if questions. That's what's going to open up the conversation and open up your own thinking. So learning how to use those different types of questions the most effectively is another way to be a better questioner. I think that comes pretty easily to people if they get into the habit of questioning. You will become a better questioner as you question more.
So as you were doing the research for that book, did you also kind of look into maybe individuals who are very good at actually kind of changing the way things are being looked at? And so I was watching a movie last night. It was with Sean Penn and Naomi Watts, and it was a story about I think it was the ambassador in the US, the ambassador who was married to a CIA operative, and it got leaked by the
right,
Bush,
Valerie Plame,
Valerie Plame, and the Bush administration. And one of the things that one of the evil characters, let's put it that way, in the movie said, what we need to do is to change the question that people are asking. And so they were using it in a different way. They by closing down or changing the question, they were doing it in quite a deliberate way in order to close down people thinking a bit more kind of longer. So when you were doing all your kind of research, thinking about questioning and how people question and things, were you also able to kind of look at ways where, like, maybe the kind of media manipulators that are out there as well, how they're able to kind of change how people are asking questions, the kind of questions that they're asking?
Well, what the media does, I think, in terms of the manipulation that is done in the media, is to frame the questions for us and to say, this is the question we should all be asking about our political system right now, or why is it so corrupt, or what they will, whatever the question is, they will frame the question for us, and then we are supposed to think about that question and debate back and forth about that question. And sometimes the media is framing the questions in a way that is not best for us. The media is maybe framing the question in a way that suits their agenda, and perhaps their agenda is to create as much conflict as possible because that sells newspapers and increases ratings. So I think what we have to be careful with the media and with questioning is the way we are being told, this is the question we should all be talking about right now. And that is what the media does every day, all day. So we, as thinking individuals, need to step back from that and ask, is that really the best question? Is that really the only important question? Are there other questions that maybe are underneath that one? That may be a very surfacey question, but maybe there's another question down beneath that one that's actually more important, and maybe that's the one we should be talking about, even though the media doesn't particularly want to talk about that because it's too complicated or something. So that's where our role is, to just probably, I would say, to question the question that is being put forth to us by the media.
And you wrote a great article I was reading the other day. It was in Fast Company, and you were talking about reframing. You were talking about frame storming, which was a term I hadn't really heard before. Can you maybe talk about that and in the context of the article you wrote?
Yeah. Well, again, it's if you think of the frame as the frame is the way we let's say articulate the problem that we're thinking about, or the question that we're thinking about. Why can't we do a better job at X? So then we will frame a problem a certain way, and then we'll work on that problem. And what you find in the world of innovation, and the world in general probably, is that if you're using the wrong frame, or you're asking the wrong question, a lot of energy is going to go toward the wrong solution. I see in the business world all the time, that companies are struggling with, how can we do this thing we do? How can we do it faster? How can we do it cheaper? How can we do it more efficiently? And oftentimes, or sometimes, they're asking the wrong question. They're using the wrong frame. They never step back and ask, for instance, why are we doing it at all? Because this thing that they are so caught up with trying to do faster may not be the best thing for them to be doing anymore. Maybe they need to shift their focus, or they need to do what they're doing differently. Maybe this process that they're trying to make more efficient is actually an unnecessary process to begin with. So I think that when you talk about framing and frame storming, you need to figure out, are you asking the right questions? Are you framing the problem the right way? Are your assumptions correct? You need to challenge all of those things. So when you do frame storming, what you will do, or I refer to it as question storming, is you will take a problem that you're working on, and instead of trying to come up with answers to the problem, you will have the group of people just try to formulate as many questions as they can related to that problem. And, so if the problem is student engagement, instead of immediately trying to come up with an answer for how we can get students more engaged, you're asking questions like, what do we mean by student engagement? Why is student engagement important? And so when you do that, you start to challenge the assumptions and the framing of the problem, and you start to challenge the essential question that everyone is working on. And it's very interesting when you do that. You can start to see that, gee, maybe we're not really working on the right problem here, or we need to shift the direction slightly of what we're even thinking about here before we start trying to come up with a solution. So anyway, that's why that can be very, very effective, as opposed to just trying to come up with ideas.
And I mean, it's fascinating when you think about the number of great innovations that have come about from, as you say, people just they asked a better question, and exactly. They asked a different question. So when you've obviously spent these years, writing and publishing and now also speaking as well. But can you tell our listeners about a time where you worked on a project, you gave it your heart and your soul, but for whatever reason it just didn't work out like you'd hope, and more importantly, what were the lessons that you learned from that experience? What were some of the questions that you asked yourself and you reflected on from that experience?
Oh, well, an earlier book that I did, I had very high hopes for. It was a book about design and design thinking, and it was called Glimmer. And it was, a very hotly anticipated book, and there was a bidding war for the book and everything. And then it came out and it just didn't do any business. And it just came out very quietly and just didn't get noticed. And so for me, the lessons were, this was before I'd done too many books of my own. I was still kind of inexperienced as an author. And the lesson for me there was, when you create a project and put it out into the world, you are ultimately responsible for it. And you better know that going in, because if you think that, a publisher or, an agent or someone else is going to make all this happen for you, which I kind of thought, I kind of made a lot of assumptions that I just had to write the book. And then, once that happened, if I did a good job writing the book, everything else would take care of itself. And what I learned was that, no, you, especially in today's world, once you create something, it's really up to you what happens to that thing. There's a lot of stuff you can do now because of social media and because of just the opportunities that are out there. There are a lot of ways you can spread the word about what you've created. There are a lot of great things you can do, but you have to do them because there's probably nobody else who cares about your project as much as you do. Even in this case, I assumed the publisher would, but they just didn't. They just didn't do a great job. And so now on my next book, I really took responsibility, and I started working early on the marketing of the book and how I was going to promote it, and I was as creative as I could be in terms of trying to figure out every way to get the word out about that book.
And that's really, you used being creative in terms of how you get the word out. It seems to. We have a lot of guests on the show who maybe are musicians or they're artists, and many of the most successful ones I've seen, they've been able to translate their creativity they have in the art form that they're creating into how it's marketed and how it's sold, exactly. Rather than just kind of park that at the door as well. I suppose that feels like quite a big change that's happened. It happened obviously in the music industry, but it's also obviously now happening within the book publishing industry as well.
It's happening everywhere. I think we're all, and people don't like to hear this sometimes, but as artists, we're all marketers now. And you can shake your head and say, gee, it shouldn't be that way because we're artists and we shouldn't be marketers. And maybe we're not even trained to be, and maybe we don't think we're very good at it, but it doesn't matter. It's a reality now that if you're an artist, you have to also be a marketer. Now, the good news is, the media is very different than it used to be. It's much more open in a lot of ways, and you don't have to be an expert in public relations to figure out how to get something placed in a publication. There are a lot of ways to get your voice out there now. So really, what you have to do as an artist is figure out, how can I talk about this thing I've created? How can I talk about it in an interesting way how do I figure out who are all the audiences that are going to care about this? And what are some ways I can reach those people that might be open to me? Maybe it's blogs, maybe it's things that are not that hard to get into. But I have to find them, and I have to be creative, and I have to have a good message, because the blog, even if it's a small blog, wants you to be interesting and wants you to connect with the readers or the audience. So I think that's now where and things like this podcast are a perfect example. I mean, these opportunities didn't exist years ago. So I think now as an artist we have to be aware of that.
So when you're writing like this book you're writing just now, are you almost kind of consciously thinking about, this could be an interesting strand for a Fast Company piece
totally.
As well? So you're kind of thinking those angles as well.
It's part of the structure of the book. It's now built into the structure of the book. And again, I mean, maybe that's if someone's a purist, they could say, gee, it shouldn't be that way. You should just be doing it in the most artful, way. But I'm thinking as I'm writing it, who is going to be interested in this part of the book, and how will I get that word out to them? Maybe before the book even comes out. Maybe it'll be a blog post or something before the book comes out that'll start to, create the initial buzz for the book. So yeah, I'm definitely thinking that way.
And I'm guessing as well, your background in journalism comes in very useful at that point, because in terms of writing to certain kind of word counts and being punchy in terms of the writing, where maybe if someone that's come at it from a traditional kind of creative writing or novelist kind of background, writing in with those boundaries it can be quite tough.
I think it helps, but I also think anyone can do it. I think that what you have to do is just sort of use your intuition and your common sense, combined with doing a lot of research to sort of figure out, who are the different audiences out there and what are they interested in, and then find the things they're reading and look at the things they're reading and say, what kind of material is this podcast or this blog or this publication? What kind of articles are they delivering to this audience? And where do I fit into all that? Where does my message fit into the kind of content that they're delivering? I really think, yes, it helps if you're a journalist, because obviously you have experience doing that. But I don't think it's rocket science. And I think, anyone who's creative and willing to do the research can figure that stuff out.
And Warren, can you tell us about a time when you had some kind of insight or light bulb, or you asked a game-changing question of yourself, and it just kind of set you on a slightly different path in the way you were thinking, and just going to change the paradigm for you?
Well, I think probably with the question book, I sort of changed the way I think a little bit, and I asked myself some bigger questions. I guess normally as a journalist or a writer, I would be asking myself, how can I complete this assignment? And that would be as big as the question got. And or how can I finish this book? And then once the assumption in my head was always, I'll move on to the next thing after that. So all I have to worry about is completing this immediate task. As I got into this subject of questioning, it started to feel very important to me, and it started to feel almost more like a mission. So I think I changed the questions that I was asking myself, and it became less about, how do I do this book, and more about how do I have an impact with this subject, and how do I change the way people think about questioning, and how might I encourage more questioning in the world. So it starts to become a very big, ambitious, and what I would call a beautiful question. As you get into that kind of ambitious stuff, to me, that becomes a beautiful question. Before I was asking more practical questions, and that was a beautiful question. And so I think that changed the way I work. It's the last couple of years, I look at my work differently now. I look at it as a much larger, almost a lifelong challenge or mission that I'm working on. And it doesn't matter if I finish one book or finish a second book on it. I'm still going to be working on this as a larger mission and coming at it from a lot of different angles.
So this mission now includes going out and speaking about, the questioning and speaking about the things that you write about. Was that a relatively recent thing? Was that as you on this book or the last book you started doing more speaking, or has it been something you've been doing for a while?
No, this is fairly recent. Yeah, and it's really been it was a big adjustment for me in the last few years to start to do speaking, because I was never the type of person who got up and did speeches. That was not my thing. I was more the typical, what we would think of as the typical writer, more solitary, more keeping to myself, and used to expressing myself in writing as opposed to, expressing myself in speeches. So it was an adjustment. I studied up as much as I could about it, worked on it, practiced it. You do have to practice speaking, worked on my speech writing and the whole delivery and all of that. So yeah, that's a new sort of craft that I've learned, and I'm still learning. I still feel like I'm, when it comes to speaking, I'm just in the early stages of learning and becoming good at it.
And in that learning how to give a great presentation and change people's mind in that way, in the way that they think about the world. Were there any tips or any things that you picked up as you were doing that research on how to be a really great speaker?
Well, one thing is that there's a really great speaking coach who does a blog called Public Words, and his name is Nick Morgan. And he's great. I recommend if people are interested in speaking, look up this guy and subscribe to his blog, because he has great articles, great posts. And one of the things he said is one of the things he says is the only reason to do a speech is to change the world. And I love that idea. And what he's really saying, what he's essentially saying there is, don't get up there and waste people's time unless you really believe in what you're speaking about, and unless you can impart something to them where they'll walk away a little bit different. They'll walk away with a little bit different view of an issue or something. Something will have an impact on them. If you can incorporate that philosophy into your speaking, you also become a better speaker, because you start to worry less about some of the details of, gee, I'm nervous about how people are perceiving me or all that stuff. And you start to think about the bigger issue. I believe in what I'm saying. How do I get this? How do I, you almost become an evangelist. How do I get this across to people? How am I going to change these people's lives? And if you can get yourself thinking that way, you become more passionate and you become a better speaker. So it was probably one of the biggest insights that I ever came across about speaking. That's
some great advice. And we've had a few speakers on the show before who have spoken about innovation, creativity, and change management and things. And one of the gentlemen was Frederick Haran, who speaks in Asia a lot about creativity. And I'll post a link here on the show notes for this episode as well. But he said something very, very similar to that. And he kind of phrased it in a slightly different way, but just having that authenticity as well. Yes. On stage, and believing what you're saying, because it's just something deep down, as you mentioned, like that kind of word mission. Is you're just using a different medium in which to express it, rather than writing. You're speaking it, but it comes from a core, a kind of central place for you.
Yeah, and I think audiences will pick up on that. And I think if we're too concerned with, am I structuring the speech so I have a funny line here and I have a great slide there, and if we think that's what the speech is about, we're wrong. The speech is about the passion and whether or not that is conveyed to the people in the audience, and so that's, to me, that's the important thing.
And do you have any online resources or tools or apps like Evernote that you love and that you find really valuable as a writer and as a speaker?
My wife and creative partner is always trying to get me to use Evernote, and I am so backwards. I still use paper a lot. When I'm in the gathering stage of fact finding and gathering materials, I tend to create files of articles and clippings and things I've jotted down on paper. And eventually, and sometimes even when I'm outlining, I'm still working with pen and ink as I'm sketching outlines and doing things. And then at some point, I'll start to transfer it all over to the Word document and start working on a document at that point. But it's amazing how long I will continue to work on paper. And I don't know whether it's just habit. One could say it's just habit, and I haven't taken the time to get comfortable with technology and so forth. I also have another view, which could be, maybe this is a view that all Luddites have, I don't know, but I have this view that there is something special that happens when you're writing on a pad and you're scratching things out and you're scribbling things. There's kind of a direct line that goes from your brain to the point of the pen, and there are things that can come out there that when you're sitting at a computer keyboard don't seem to happen as freely. Now, maybe the technology is going to address that at some point, or maybe it already has and I've missed it. But I just think that there's a kind of creativity that happens when you're sketching and scribbling that doesn't necessarily happen when you're at the keyboard and you're trying to compose. Composing sentences and feeling that you're trying to compose a more finished thing. I automatically get that feeling once I'm at the keyboard that this is more official now. I'm actually writing now. Yeah. And, but yet when I've got a notepad in front of me, I don't feel that I'm at that stage. Then I'm still at the stage of just playing with ideas and writing things in the margin and scratching them out and that kind of thing. And I find that a little more freeing.
And I think I've heard that a number of times from a number of writers and entrepreneurs as well, who they can think conceptually, and the research and the conceptual thinking about things and the strategizing comes much more easily with pen and paper or on a big whiteboard.
Yes.
And it feels that when you sit at the computer, that's the perfect medium for editing. And so the editing process is much nicer and much cleaner and everything. But you kind of almost feel that when you sit down there to write on a computer, your ideas have to be a bit more kind of fully formed because there's less room.
There has to be something there. Now, of course, it's interesting too, because when I start writing on the computer, a lot of times the things that seem brilliant on the scratch pad turn out to not be so great, because once you actually have to write them out in full sentences and think about them on that level, all of a sudden you realize, maybe this isn't as great as I thought it was. But that's okay too. There's still something happening at that early stage that is very free form and unfettered. And I think that I don't ever want to lose that. I don't want technology to ever cause me to lose that. I don't know. I don't think that Evernote would cause that. Evernote is more about the source materials and gathering all the articles and making sure you can get at them really fast. But I do think that in general, I probably will always be using paper and pen at some level of my creativity.
And it's funny, I was talking to someone the other day about many years ago. I saw Edward de Bono speak, and he was talking. His whole thing was he would sit down at this overhead projector with a pen and this acetate paper, and he would draw. Very characters. But there was something about that medium, as simple as it was, that you remember. Where you might not necessarily remember. And I think back to now, and I can remember the visual symbols, and I can remember stories, but chances are I will not be able to remember some of the other detail, or if there was some things that were written down from that event as well. So it's just it's that memory.
The power of visuals, very, very strong, and that's why the napkin sketch, is so powerful. It's just a very, very kind of a shorthand way of conveying images, and it can be very, very powerful.
And if you could only recommend one book to our listeners, and also one record, an album, what would they be?
Let's see, one book and one record, one album. I think the album is very particular to my tastes. When years ago I was very struck by an album called "Get Happy" by Elvis Costello and the Attractions. It was one of his early albums, but I thought it was one of the most brilliantly written albums I'd ever come across. All of the songs were extremely short, and they were incredibly well written. And that's still to this day is one of my favorite albums, and I would urge people to check it out. It's kind of a forgotten album, but anyway. And as far as books, I don't know. I'll pick out a book that I read fairly recently, and I love the author of this book, Adam Grant. Wrote a book called Give and Take. He has a new book out now called Originals, but the book that really impacted me was Give and Take, which is all about the idea that if we tend to think that people who give are suckers and that they're going to be taken advantage of by the people who take. And what Adam Grant showed, that givers actually do very well in the world if they're smart about it. But there's something very, very powerful in sharing your time with people, sharing your helping people when you can, doing favors for people, as long as you don't become a doormat or something. But you got to be kind of smart about it, and you got to manage your time. But he said if you can do that well, it actually increases your chances for personal success. And I thought that's a radical idea, and yet he lays it out beautifully with lots of evidence. And so I thought, that's a game changer, a book like that.
Great suggestions. And I'll put those, if people go to jamestaylor.me, just type in Warren Berger and you're going to get the links all to the show notes for here as well. So Warren, let's imagine if you woke up tomorrow morning and you had to start from scratch. So you have the tools of your trade, you have your notepads, and you have your computer with Word on it, and the knowledge you've acquired over the years as a writer and as a speaker and as a thinker on these issues. But you know no one, and no one knows you. You have to restart. How would you restart?
I think I would do pretty much what I'm doing now, which is I would look around for ways to get my message out there, and I would spend some time thinking about which areas I want to focus on, and then I wouldn't put all my eggs necessarily in one basket. I might have a couple of different areas that I'm going to write about and look into, and then I would start to try to figure out where's the interest in this area that I'm interested in, and how do I get the word out, and how do I build my expertise in that area. And maybe I'd start small with blog posts, articles, things like that, and then figure out how to work my way up into doing a book or something larger, something more substantial. But I think I'd start small. And I'd start with, just getting my name out there and getting my ideas out there. What are the things I believe in? What do I have to say that people could benefit from hearing? And then just work on getting that out there into the world any way I can.
Well, Warren, it's been a pleasure having you on the show today and listening to your ideas and talking about the power of asking more beautiful questions. What's the best way that listeners can connect with you, learn more about your books, your writing, and your speaking?
The best way is just through my site, A More Beautiful Question, amorebeautifulquestion.com. And if you go on there, there's lots and lots of articles about questioning and why it's important, and lots of stories about how great questions led to world changes. And there's even things like, you can take a quiz to see what kind of a questioner you are. And there's all kinds of things like that. So it's a lot of fun. It's very rich in content. And so I'd advise people to, check it out.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Warren, for coming on the show today. I wish you all the best with the new book as well. Look forward to reading that when it comes out.
Great. Thank you very much, James. Good talking to you.
Hey, James Taylor here again. And if you're interested in living a more creative life, then I'd love to invite you to join me as I share some of the most successful strategies and techniques that high-performing creatives use. I put them all together in a free downloadable ebook that you can get by going to jamestaylor.me. That's jamestaylor.me to get your free downloadable ebook on creativity.